All right. I am here with Jonathon Curlett. Jonathan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, man. Good. So we spent and survived Halloween last night. Did you steal any of your daughter's candy
Not
and
this
be
year.
honest about it?
I have been good. I did not steal her candy. My wife and I have been trying to be a little bit more healthy, in the year of COVID, and so I was able to control myself last night.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, man. Like I came home and Madison had her candy on the ground, and I grabbed a Reese's peanut butter cup. That's like the only type of candy I would ever want to eat, and I do it just for Halloween. And so she tried a new technique to get me to not steal her candy. She said it probably has COVID on it and needs to sit for at least 3 days before anyone eats it. So
Wow.
I ate it anyway. So I was willing to risk it for the Reese's. So, well, hey, why don't you start? One of the reasons I wanted to have you as a guest is, you are a CFO. I'm a CFO. I know we love talking about that stuff because we do it all the time. I just thought it'd be an interesting conversation to have other people to listen to, kind of two CFOs talking about just business in general, kind of stuff we do. So why don't you kind of just give your background, and I'll just kind of jump in and dig into stuff as it comes.
Sure. Yeah. So just the high level summary of my experience. That I started out to go to school to become a pharmacist, and I ultimately became an accountant, and and
Where
that
did you
kind of
go to
took me
school?
down this path. Um, Well, Ward, we didn't even get to the high level. That
I'm
um,
not letting it go to high level, man. I interrupt.
no high
Keeping you
level.
on
We're going
track.
back to detail. Yeah, so I went to a lot of schools, but I graduated my undergrad from University of North Texas in Denton,
Nice.
Texas. Yeah, and
Yeah.
it was accounting control systems, and then my MBA was from SMU, there in
Okay.
Dallas. So. But yeah, so I went down the accounting path, and I did some consulting, manufacturing, distribution, financial services, kind of bounced around and landed in healthcare, and worked at a major health plan for a while in their behavioral health, newly acquired behavioral health subsidiary, and that kind of got me back into healthcare, and I stayed there ever since, and bounced around a couple different CFO jobs and both the health plan side and the provider side, and kind of a heavy focus on behavioral health and healthcare services. So, yeah, that's kind of where I've been, and I lean on the MBA quite a bit. Actually, spent some time in a COO role as well, and so I was kind of blessed to be able to see both sides of what you're doing with data, right? And where you're at as far as trying to execute on those strategic decisions that we make in an executive team versus create the insights, and kind of those talking points and the strategic decisions that we make.
Talk about, because I want to dig in now. This will be 50,000 foot level too. I think a lot of people ask me, and I'm sure a lot of people ask you, like, how do you become a CFO? Because it's something that a lot of people want to do. Your path's a lot more traditional than mine, and I want to kind of go into, if you were, so first of all, back when you were in college and you started down that accounting road, did you know at that point you wanted to be a CFO, or was it later?
Well, yeah, it was much later. When I was thinking accounting, I went through the different business degrees, and I said to myself, can I do that? Right? How does marketing feel to me? How does general business feel? How does finance feel? And when I got to accounting, I thought through it, and I said, I don't understand that. Right. And like that, out of all the different natural strengths that
Meaning that you said to yourself, I don't understand accounting, so I want to do that.
exactly. Right. I wanted to be in business, but I didn't feel like I needed to get the degree to just have a general business degree to do business, right? But where I felt my
Sure.
weakness was accounting. When I looked at the different degrees, and I said, wow, accounting is something that is not just inherently known, and it needs to be learned, and ultimately it is the language of business. And so, if you want to be able to articulate business to people, you really need to understand accounting. And so that's why I'm going to go with the weakest link for myself, which was accounting at that point. And so that's why I picked it.
Okay. What and then so you started off as you said consulting, and then
Mm-hmm.
at what point did you say, hey, I think I want to be a CFO, or did you kind of fall into it?
Well, I was looking for, progression in my career, and I had a mentor back then that gave me some really great advice. And he's like, look, you can stay on this consulting path and it's going to take you a certain place, or you can get into a traditional path to uh, go towards executive management inside of the business, right? CFO, CEO, whatever it might be. And he's like, if you're going to do that, you need to do it now and earlier in your career, and go spend some time in the trenches, right? Go actually be on the front line, be a staff accountant or senior accountant or whatever it is, and actually do the work. Don't just walk through the process. Don't do the consulting of it. Spend the time, being the guy doing the cash reconciliation, so you know what it's like, and then really get the most diverse experience you possibly can, so that when you're up for that next role, whatever it may be, you can pull from that. And so I took that advice, and I immediately switched from consulting and tried to go get into the trenches and start learning, and then just kind of going from there, right? Where I could build off of whatever my last experience was. And I was just craving the ability to learn something new while like actually doing it in the business. And that's kind of what led me to, these progressive steps to becoming a CFO ultimately. It was just, I wanted to learn what I didn't know by actually doing it.
What was your first CFO job, and also how old were you?
Um, when I was at Humana, at the behavioral health subsidiary, the CFO and the CEO president that were part of that company that had been acquired, they stayed on. And so I actually took on a job as the corporate controller of that CFO, underneath the CFO of the acquisition. And what I didn't know was that in 2-3 years, something like that, that legacy team phased out, right? And so then as they were integrating this into this big, Fortune 100 company, there was going to, kind of be a switch in the way that the company actually was run and managed. And so I was able to move from that controller role into a chief of finance role over the subsidiary. And so
Okay.
that was kind of my first stepping stone into it. But then after that, then it was progressively more responsibility in like full on CFO roles, right? And so I'd say that Humana job really kind of opened my eyes to what it was like to be an executive, right? And to be with some training wheels from a parent company, right? And that was actually incredibly helpful in my career to be part of those strategic decisions, be part of board-like conversations, and have that progressive responsibility on me to help make the company the best version of itself that it could be, right? And every time I moved from company after that, right, it was because I wanted to get M&A experience, or it was because I wanted to get experience on the provider side, or whatever it may be, right? What can I learn in my next role that I haven't done before, right? And those were the things that really kind of drew me towards various opportunities that were out there.
So what was the transition like from becoming a controller? So it sounds like this VP of finance role, it just kind of morphed into a full-blown CFO role. Am I correct in that read?
Yeah, it was, there's so much restructuring going on back in those days at the company I was at. And, there's a sort of a void there whenever one of the executives within the company would move or they take on different responsibility, right? And so sometimes that chaos creates opportunity. And I think I just got incredibly lucky in some ways by being in the right place at the right time, and being able to learn from some of the really incredible people that were there working with me, at the same time frame. So yeah, I just kind of evolved and just took advantage of, every opportunity that was presented to me and made the most of it.
What the transition from controller to, let's call it CFO, because that definitely happened at some point. What did you have to leave behind that you did as a controller that you kind of had to leave behind and let someone else do? And what was that transition like for you to be completely acting like a CFO?
Yeah, honestly, I'm still learning that lesson, right? I mean, this is what my fourth role at this point, and as a chief. But I think progressively, I keep saying that word. Your podcast listener is going to be mad at me now. Every time I say progressive or progressively or some variation of that, you need to take a drink.
We should have done YouTube live for this. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think what it is it's not being the star, right? It's when you're in a working role where you're the contributor. It's, man, I want to dive into that data and create that insight, come up with the presentation, right? And I still crave that that function sometimes where I actually just want to lock myself away for 8 hours and dig into the data and create the spreadsheet and then the presentation, right?
Man, I do the same thing. I find myself where you're sitting there, there's an issue with something, and you want to dig in and create the spreadsheet yourself because you can do it, you know exactly what you want, but you've got to let the other people in finance handle that. Number one, so they develop their skills, but number two, like, you have to really stay high level. And if you get too bogged down in one thing and spend 8 hours of a day doing it, there's so many other things that you can't touch because of the time you're spending.
Exactly, right? You're not doing your real job because you're doing your employee's job. And in a way, it's because you're not trusting them, right? You're not giving them the opportunity to grow. And so I sort of pivoted my view as to like what my actual role was, and it really became about my employees. Like, how do I create these opportunities for them? How do I make them the best versions that they can be, while keeping the kind of corralling the company as best I can from my perspective and my role in making the company the best version that it can be, right? And there's these little growing experiences that occur throughout the year that may not come up for another year, right? Whether it's creating that budget, or whether it's an acquisition opportunity, or maybe it's some kind of new tax or law associated with the accounting, and all of a sudden it's like, man, if you don't bring your team into that, you rob them from that experience. And on top of that, to your point earlier, you weren't doing what you probably should have been doing. You were spending time relying on yourself and your data instead of your team. So I really tried to pivot that perspective into the team focus and be a better leader. And you always hear the advice like, hire great people and get out of their way. You know what I mean? And I think I really tried to do that and continue to try to do that. And I've been very fortunate to work with some incredible people, that I've been able to hire and inherit in some cases in the teams that I've led. And that truly is probably the key to success as a CFO, right? It's having that team underneath you so that you don't feel like you've got to be the one digging into whatever it is, right? That you can trust your controller, your accounting manager, your FP&A manager, your payroll person, and that you can rely on the strength of the team, and then do your job in pulling all that together and creating those strategic insights, where you're kind of sitting in a position that other people don't get to see all of it at the same time, and you do, right? And that's where you're really adding value.
You do. Yeah. I view my role a lot as kind of just helping the CEO fulfill his or her vision. Talk about that and the CFO's role as it pertains to the CEO.
Well, the CFO and the COO are they overlap often, right? And
Sure.
what they go and do after the fact is a little different. Certainly one's more about executing on the strategy, and the other one's about measuring it and finding those insights and being kind of like the first voice of whatever, right? Hey, let's celebrate this. Hey, let's be concerned about this, whatever it may be, right? It's trying to reach into that data and the financial consequences associated with it, good or bad. But both COO, CFO, in my perspective, are there to be a partner to the CEO. Yes, they are working for the CEO, but they're also working with the CEO. And in some cases, whatever dotted line, solid line, it really doesn't matter. The goal is that the CEO is the visionary and is leading this company, right? And has that same team to rely on, whether it's from the operations or the finance side. And so while there's that overlap and that similarity between a COO and a CFO in backing up the CEO, I think where the finance person is slightly different is that they're really focused on the financial consequences that I was talking about earlier, right? Like,
sure,
it's one thing to say, here's where I want to go. I'm the CEO, and this is where we need to take this company. But then when that person hands it off and says, okay, COO, go execute on that and make it happen. Okay, CFO, make sure that you pull in the resources that we need to go make that happen. Make sure that you're watching those resources as we're making it happen, so that we're being wise in the way that we use them. It's tackling the same thing but from different perspectives, and so it's really a team effort, right?
Yeah, that's a good point, that it's equal parts the COO and the CFO working together to make the CEO's vision happen. Because in our business, the COO is responsible for a lot of hey, we need to hire workers because we're a labor business. Obviously, the more you pay, the easier it's going to be. But it's my job to say, hey, here's what we can afford in certain markets, given what the customer's paying us. Do we need to go ask the customer for more? Because if we paid what you're asking, our margins would be unreasonable. Should we eat it because we have enough margin there? So it's kind of putting it in terms of for the COO, where they can understand, hey, here's the parameters you've got to work with to get the job done in a quality manner.
Absolutely, yeah. The relationship there within the executive team is so crucial. And I never fully understood that until I spent time in the role, right, in an executive role. And it really is a team, right? They have to be able to rely on each other and trust each other, and know that you've got their back, and that if you see something, you're going to say it. You're quickly, hey, did you know that this is happening? Maybe you do, but your numbers jumped on whatever cost center, or you've got a contract up for renewal, and then you fill in, right? CFOs tend to wear a lot of hats, and there's a reason that they tend to be interim COO or interim CEO, because there is that overlap, and they are teammates, right? And so I think that CEO definitely is the visionary and the leader, but the COO and the CFO need to be there to back that person up and to be a teammate to that person too, right? And I think that when you see those really strong, highly performing teams, it's because those executives have a good relationship too.
How do you feel? Let me think how to phrase this. How do you feel how much effort do you have to make to translate financial numbers, especially when it comes to accounting terms, to your CEO and your COO, and describe that? Like when you're closing the books in a month, I mean, there's obviously a lot of subjectivity around that. How do you couch these things to a CEO, a COO, and even to the board, to kind of make them understand why you might be doing certain things the way that you are?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough question, because it depends on, two things. One, the experience or knowledge of the other leader, whoever that might be. And then two, really what they're expecting from you too, right? I mean, some cases, they used to be an accountant and now they're COO or CEO, right? And And in some cases, they already know the answer and they want to know that you know it, or they want to hear your perspective on it. And to your point, it is so subjective sometimes. Is this a good number or a bad number? Well, time will tell, right? You need a trend. And in some cases, if you don't have enough time for a trend and you're trying to analyze that, it's hard to say, and there's hidden variables, right? You don't always know everything. That's really one of the hardest parts is you got to make a decision, and it has to be a time sensitive decision typically. And you don't have all the information, but you still got to make that decision and move forward. And so I think really going through, to your question there is, it has to be with, it has to be with the CEO or whoever the other leader is, if it's a board or whatever it may be, really trying to set the tone for what they expect out of the CFO, right? In some cases, it's a smaller company and it's more of a CF no, right? You're the budget person, you're supposed to be controlling cost. And what they really want out of you is just a financial leader from the aspect of controlling cost, right? And saying no to costs so they don't get out of control, right? And you're just managing cost center at that point. Other folks are looking someone that's more visionary, but from a financial perspective, and they're like, well, how do I grow margin, right? Like I want somebody to hear me say, this is the direction I want to take the company, but then translate that into some type of margin analysis or conversation around how do I make money doing this, right? It's like one thing to say, let's go into this market, but it's a totally different thing to actually figure out how to make money to go into that market or get the resources to then fund that venture. And so I think it comes down to what are the expectations of that CFO. And I think going through the life cycle of a business, you kind of have to have different perspectives on that. When you're starting out small or you're fundraising to grow, and you're still small and you're trying to accumulate resources and protect them, there's a different perspective that you have wearing that hat than when now you're maybe more mature and it's about trying to squeeze that margin a little bit more, continue to push volume through and try to make the most of what you've got. And that, I think that understanding what it is that's expected of you, that's going to drive the perspective that you should have in that seat. And it's not the same, right? You'll see that sometimes where a company grows and they outgrow that leader. And, or in some cases, the leader's like, no, I like this. I'm scrappy and I want to be right in this little, phase of the life cycle. And so, I've outgrown, the role, right? And I want to move on into another place where I can be scrappy again.
That's a good point, because life cycle companies have life cycles and executives have life cycles, and sometimes those don't always mesh. Even though the company might be a real good company or the executive might be a real good executive. All right, sorry about that. We had some technical difficulties, but we are back. So, the video will have a little disjointed splice, but one of the things in the subject you're just talking about that's so interesting is the COO, and our company that doesn't have an official COO. We're doing some restructuring, but we have someone who kind of functions in that capacity. It really is, when they're going off and executing on the operations side, they are really reliant on the CFO to kind of give them the parameters with which to work. How do you think about what you show your COO and your CEO to kind of show them the results that you think are going to occur by actions that the COO is taking in operations?
Yeah, certainly there's a cadence to those discussions around data, right? And they are, they're driven by the different things that are affecting the business, right? And if you're lucky, you can have your standard monthly review and there's no surprises, but typically there's something weird going on in the business, right? Every month, something, even if there isn't, it's because you're pushing it, right? You're like, I'm trying to grow. And so I'm going to strategically dig into something new, right? An adjacent market or whatever it may be. And so what happens is that all of a sudden what you typically would have looked at in the information, financial or otherwise, it's not there, right? It's not part of that monthly cadence, and it's man, you know what? I need to know this information today. I don't want to wait 4 weeks to find out. And so, it's on the team to figure out a way to quickly pull that and analyze it, and then present some kind of insight and the data itself for people to make decisions off of. So there's this constant alignment that's going on as you're working with the different teams on operations, or the CEO or any other shared service. And I think that alignment that you're talking about, and like, well, what is it? How do you decide what to show them, right? Well, it's a collaboration. They're going to tell me what they need to see, and I'm going to see stuff, and I'm going to ask them if it's something they need to see, right? And it's kind of back to this whole conversation around what are the revenue drivers, what are the cost drivers. Well, the revenue drivers and the cost drivers are the operating KPIs, and they need to be discussed, and hopefully in the language of the business, right? And if you can find a way to convert the way that the operator talks about their company or their part of the company with and blend that in with the way that the accountant talks about the company, and now you're really talking, right? You're speaking about financial drivers in their language and translating it constantly back and forth. And so now it doesn't matter, right? You're going to have a conversation where you're both able to understand what the other one is saying, and you don't necessarily have to come to them and say, hey, you need to look at this, or they don't necessarily have to come to you and say, hey, you need to look at this. It's just going to come out in the conversation, because there's this constant alignment as you're walking through what's important, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes sense. It's an interesting dynamic. I go through the same thing with our CEO and our version of COO, and constantly like asking them what they're looking to see, kind of adding what I think they should be seeing, getting feedback from them, and just kind of going through that process until you all get on the same page about what it exactly needs to be seen.
And I would bet that conversation that you're having, right, as you're saying, you kind of this cycle. If you like recorded what that conversation is, whenever you feel like you have a pivot in the way that you look at the data, financial or otherwise, I would bet that if you wrote that down, you'd go back and look and see, you know what it was? We were trying to figure out each other's language. Whenever we were trying to add something to the report, probably the core of that conversation was, what does this mean to you? When I say this, it means this to me. When you say that, it means that to you. What is, translating between the two worlds. And then once you know that, it's like, wow, okay, these are the things that I need to have on this report every time. I got to break this thing apart.
It's funny how when you just start working with like a new CEO, because I've just gone through this because we changed CEOs less than 6 months ago, and it was a real adjustment, especially for the first month. Even with the new CEO I had worked with ever since I'd been at this company. So I've been working with him for over a year when he transitioned to the CEO role. But it was like getting to understand exactly what he needs to see in order to make effective decisions. I feel like that's something a CFO, like I don't feel like they really have to adjust to my style. I feel like the CFO really needs to be able to adjust to a CEO and a COO as well. What do they need to see in order to make effective decisions? And you've kind of got to pull that out of them and figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, I can see them saying, well, we need to look at direct margin. Okay, well, let's define what direct margin is. Because in some cases, they may look at that and say, well, I meant direct margin, but without this other thing, or, add something else in there, or break it down by this way, right? And so all of a sudden, when, you're trying to adjust so that they know, or they can see what it is that they want to see or what they want to know, I think it has to do with that language, right? It's, what does direct margin mean to your CEO, right? Or whatever it is, right? And to your point, you've got to change your style to them. Certainly. I think that
and I hope, everybody is constantly learning in their role, right? And constantly growing and constantly learning new terminology and new ways to kind of slice and dice the data. And I think that allows the people to grow as much as the business to grow when they're doing that.
Sure. Hey, let's switch gears and talk about the healthcare industry. This is obviously a very weird year. Why don't you give a little background about your current company and what you all do? And then how has this year just been, if it has been different, how so? I mean, our year has been wildly different. And all we do is, clean hospitals and provide food service. So I can only imagine behavioral health. It has to be crazy.
Yeah, well, this was definitely a unique year. Um, so my company was it was backed by a private equity company back in early 2019, and they bought a Texas company that does ABA therapy for children with autism. Right? It's very
What
much a subset.
therapy?
Yeah, so applied behavioral analysis. It's a treatment for or sort of it's a behavioral coaching for children, and it really doesn't necessarily have to be children or just autism, but it's a strategy that people use to help change behavior, right? And I certainly don't pretend to be a doctor or even a clinician of any sort, right? But it's incredible to support those people and to be part of
Sure.
of this, right? And so I've come from a background that was more general mental health and substance abuse, and so now being in this company and specifically seeing kind of that subset and specifically, children with autism, it's really rewarding to hear the stories. Every week we'll get on a management call and we'll say, well, tell me one good thing that happened this week, right? Again, somebody's got a story from the field to share. And I love hearing those stories about how, the clinicians are making an impact in the lives of the patients and their family members, right? In some cases, these kids are nonverbal, and then all of a sudden, through the coaching, they end up where they're saying their first words over time, and
That's cool.
the impact that it has on a family, right? And that's the kind of stuff that that really makes it rewarding to be able to say, I'm not just a mercenary, right? I'm not just throwing these accounting skills into the mix to make money. I'm actually trying to make the world a better place by supporting the people that actually do that. And while I certainly don't have the ability to go in there and do anything on the medical side, I do have the ability to make sure that we grow, right? And that we can hire as many good people as we can and grow into as many markets as we can and make a positive impact on, the overall industry. You ever heard the phrase no money, no mission, or no margin, no mission?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's I take that to heart, right? You don't have to be a nonprofit or a for-profit for that to mean something to you. It's
No, but
I
I
think it
mean,
applies to everything.
at the end of the day, if you're not running an effective business, you can't help anybody.
Certainly, I mean, you're going to go out of business, right? You can help one person today and go out of business, or you can figure out a way to, have some level of sustainability and help even more people, for years thereafter. And so that I really think through that when we're making difficult decisions, it really comes down to, how do I make this sustainable? So our company, we were just in the process of growing. We went through a handful of acquisitions in 2019. I joined here at the beginning of 2020. I moved out to the Austin area, and 2 weeks after I moved here, the whole thing shut down, and it was COVID, right? And so, we really struggled at first because so much of what our company does is face to face, right? It's not the kind of thing that you can really do, you know, over the internet, right, or over the phone. You typically need to, especially with the younger kids, and you can do some of it certainly, and it's certainly depending on the patient and what's going on. There's the telehealth ability there, but the way that our whole clinics are set up, it's, people come in, they drop off the kids, they see them face to face, with
Sure.
their technicians, and it's actually these are the kinds of moments that spur innovation, right? And so we were looking for ways to, well, how do we overcome this, right? We're not going to just shut down. It's not, you don't want the children to lose their progress, but we need to be safe. So how do you do that, right? And so we pulled the team together and we looked for outside information. We looked at our, the different health officials, and just managed through chaos, right? And we did that, and within 2 months, we were able to actually financially recover from that initial impact of COVID, and continue to grow. And so we've actually closed a handful of acquisitions this year, and just continue to push it and grow, and try to take these best practices that we're learning now, and keeping things as clean as possible. And yeah,
is it easier to find deals now in the M&A market than it was before?
Well, I think the deals are different from my perspective than they were before, in that there's so much unknown, right? And there's this true COVID fatigue that's out there, right? And so when you're thinking about it, like, people are going to run their businesses, right? They're going to do it the best that they can, and they're going to continue, and they're going to make those decisions. And sometimes they're exiting for a reason, a very specific reason. Sometimes they're just kind of curious about what they could get, and if the number's right, they would take it, right? And so I think that the deals that are out there today, what's different about them from what you would have seen before, is that there's definitely like this impact of 2020 on the financials, right? And so they're like, well, am I going to get value for it or not? But then there's also the impact of, well, what does the future hold, right? Did this put a dent in the industry? Does this put a dent in the economy? Can you go off of the last 3 years and drag that out in your QOV, and support numbers for 2021 that you saw in 2019, but you didn't see in 2020 so far because of the impact? And so there's just it's a whole different conversation now that we never would have had back in January.
Yeah. Well, good, man. Well, we've run out of time. I won't keep you any longer, but really appreciate you coming on and kind of giving some insight. That was real good.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. Thank you. And next time I will interview you.
Yeah, let's do it, man. I'll talk to you soon.
Awesome. All
All
right.
right. See ya.
See ya.